Hello and welcome to 60 Minutes or Less, a podcast from Birthday Cake for Breakfast. I'm Andy Hughes and for episode 17 we're joined by NYC royalty, Ben Hozie of New York art punk's Bodega. An outfit we've been following since nearly day dot, or at least that's what we thought. This year saw the release of their latest album, Our Brand Could Be Your Life, a reworking of an album of the same name released almost a decade ago when they were known as Bodega Bay. A concept album about the current corporate mentality of underground and indie rock. As you'll soon hear, not much has changed since. Hey, it's like the Stereophonics said, you gotta go there to come back. Bodega ultimately formed off the back of that previous incarnation and would release their debut album Endless Scroll in 2018. We've been hooked ever since. Experts at crafting infectious bops left, right and centre, we are eager beavers for everything they put out and always try to catch them on tour whenever they're in the UK. Bracket, often. It was during their last runaround when we caught up with guitarist and vocalist Ben in Manchester during the Maybank holiday ahead of an all-dayer at Band on the Wall. Heavy on the Beatles chat, it's a discussion that goes here, there and everywhere, and would end up being one of my personal favourites from our current crop. I was gutted we didn't get the chance to talk with fellow vocalist Nicky Belfiglio. Or did we? You'll have to listen all the way to the end to find out. Buckle up, buckaroo, it's a big one. Last time we saw you was in Salford.
The Halloween show.
The Halloween spectacular show.
Yeah.
You were dressed as a pilot.
Yeah.
You did a cover of a Dusty Springfield song, which was really good with Nicky. It was pissing it down then, I think. It was pissing it down all today, I think. I just missed it when I cycled here. But Manchester seems like a spot that is good to you guys, and it seems like you guys love Manchester in return. Would you say that's the case?
Yeah, I would say a lot of the music we're influenced by is from Manchester. So whether the real place has, it has been good to us. Like, we've had good shows here, but also in our imagination, we love Manchester music. So.
It was Soup Kitchen when we first saw you in 2018, and it was total sweatbox. Yeah. And you name-checked Marky Smith at the time. Yeah. And obviously for a lot of the Six Music dads, that was like a big name check for them. Is there any, are there any like luminaries from towns and cities or local spots throughout the UK and beyond that you particularly like to go and search out? Or, is there any people from specific cities like, Gang of Four in Leeds? Or
Leeds, yeah. I mean, I feel like we've kind of done that every time we come over here. It is like that. Like in Leeds, it's like, oh, let's go. Yeah, let's go check out where the Mekons and Delta 5 and Gang of Four would have played. And, of course, we've done all the Beatles stuff in Liverpool and stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the most fun things about touring as a music fan. It gives you a more local appreciation for what's happening, and also trying to find out what's happening now. Like, who are the Manchester bands right now I need to be listening to? You know what I mean?
And have you done like the Salford Lads Club and stuff like that?
I
assume you have.
Yeah.
That always amazes me because like you see the picture of the Smiths and it's like it's got such beauty, hasn't it? And then like the street is just a typical northern street. It seems a wee bit rough and ready.
Well, I mean, I'm sure they curated that picture to frame out. It's exactly like when you see pictures of people at like the Sphinx, but then if you were to just turn your camera, there's like a Taco Bell and a McDonald's and stuff,
Is there anywhere like, elsewhere that you particularly like to, because I know touring for bands is a lot of like sitting in a van, sound checking, eating, and then that's showtime and then, head back. So is there anywhere like on your travels, we were talking before about festivals you've done, like literally this weekend, do you ever get a chance to break off? And
yeah, like we were just in Madrid and we flew in a day early, so we got to go to the Prado and see like the Goya and Velázquez paintings, and that was nice, and enjoy the city a little bit. I don't know, there's some obvious cities like Madrid or Paris where you want to at least have a day to hang out, but it doesn't always work out. I don't know, you got to kind of take it what you can. I've learned the very first tours I did, it was all party kind of energy, whereas now it's like, all right, if I have an hour to kill, maybe don't drink 2 beers, maybe go for a walk and just like take in the city. You know what I mean? You appreciate different things the more you do it.
Yeah. Back in the day, getting hammered in 60 minutes now.
Yeah.
I think that's, I take it we're of a similar age, like gone past the 30 mark. You find that creeps in, don't you? Like you might want to go and look at a tree rather than hammer some lager or something.
Exactly, yeah.
So you are doing shows at the minute, but it always seems like you're on tour. For your new record, Our Brand Could Be Your Life.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a concept record of sorts about, the corporate mentality that's always been there with like indie rock and underground music and such, but it's, been pretty prevalent for, well, always, really. It was a reworking of a 2015 record you did when you were known as a former outfit with Nicky. What was the thought process behind looking back and deciding to, rework that album?
I think there's really three reasons. The most obvious one would be that the songs still apply to the current situation. Two would be, I thought that record kind of never got a fair shake because that band broke up like right when we made it, but also it was so aggressively lo-fi that I feel like the songs deserve to be heard with a little bit more clarity.
Sure.
And, well, I guess there'd be four reasons. The third reason would be that Endless Scroll, when I wrote it, the first Bodega record, I was thinking of it as a sequel to that record. And there are references to it. So I was like, we might as well complete what we've been calling the trilogy, where that's like the prequel, Endless Scroll's the first one, and the sequel is Broken Equipment. But also, I just really like the songs. They're like maybe the first really good songs I wrote, where I feel like I found my Bodega songwriting voice. And because of that, I've wanted to put them into the show, and I realized nobody wants to hear songs that they haven't had the opportunity to check out. You know what I mean? So,
yeah.
So we might as well re-record them. And it's not really meant to replace the original one. In many ways, I want people to go back and listen to the original one. And it's its own thing now because there's some new songs and, it's like heavily condensed. The original one was 33 tracks. So it's like half as long as the original one.
Yeah.
But there's more musicality in this one because we've come a long way since then. So there's more guitar stuff going on. That's cool. But there is something about the first one that is special, I think, partially because we were so fresh that it has this like innocence to it that you can never get back.
Sure.
That innocence is gone. So if we're going to make a record, we'll never be able to make our first record again. You just can't go back. So
I suppose when you like hit upon the project that you were gonna rework it and like you say condense it in a way, was it kind of a bit gutting that, like you say, you can still create these like brilliant songs but that you couldn't capture that magic of the scrappy lo-fi aspect?
Yeah, I kind of tried to in a way because I've been calling this new record mid-fi. It's like the process was I recorded a lot of it at home, just in my apartment. I was kind of getting into the spirit of making the original one, but with what I know now. I'm not just like the original one was recorded with just a MacBook internal mic, so it's like everything is clipping on purpose, trying to get that digital distortion and find beauty in the digital decay. But this one, everything's properly mic'd and everything, but it's not like, it's still doing it at home, kind of purposefully getting this home recording energy. But then we took those home versions that I made, took them to a really nice studio, the same one where we did our second record, and then slowly replaced everything. So we got real live drums, and eventually everybody replayed their parts on top of those demos I had made. So it's technically the same session, but there's nothing really left from my home recording. But I think like having done it that way, instead of just recording everything live, it kind of I was kind of going for that. Oh, darkness, yeah. I was kind of going for that, that like...
there we go.
Early Pavement, Sebadoh, Guided by Voices, kind of... Like, a lot of the songs are kind of more in that American indie world,
Yeah.
There's a couple songs where we completely retracked them live because we wanted to really get the muscle and some more looser playing. But but the original one, we never ever played live. And there was no metronome even in the original one, which was kind of stupid looking back now. But just had the drummer playing by themselves and me dancing around like miming when the changes would be. And then the bass would play that, guitar would play that, and we'd slowly build it up. So there's all kinds of weird idiosyncrasies. Some might even call them mistakes in the original one, but they give it like a charm. Whereas, the new one's far more produced, for lack of a better word.
Yeah. I mean, I do like that scrappiness, though. You know, like there's a band called USA Nails, and
it's a great name.
Yeah, and they like, you know, they'll say like try and do it in one take.
Yeah.
To get in the mistakes and stuff, so that they can say, "Now that's fine." You know, we maybe do overdubs and stuff, but kind of like focus on that. It was interesting you said about people not hearing the songs live. Hearing the songs live, but not having heard them on a record. At that Salford show in 2022, it was just like really interesting hearing the songs and going home and being like, I don't know what those tunes, because I was reviewing it as well, and you know, being like, I don't know what those tunes were. You know, are these like new stuff? And then like it was almost like, you know, when like kind of like the endless scroll of finding all this stuff and then breaking off to research this and breaking off to research that.
Yeah.
It was kind of like discovering something that was like, oh shit, they were a band. And there was like all these different people, and you know, it just seemed very...
I mean, I'm kind of full of shit because we always play the stuff that we're working on live because it helps us figure it out.
Yeah.
Like I'm sure tonight we'll play newer stuff that we're still working out. So yeah, you know, but you can't be too indulgent with it. It can only be like, I don't know, a fifth of the show or something. If you do any more than that, I don't know. Like I love it to see my favorite bands working out material live, but if that's the whole show, I'd be a little frustrated. You want to sing the song. You want to be able to sing along in your head a little bit, you know? Yeah. There's a balance to the set list, you know?
Yeah.
There has to be some spontaneity, but there has to be familiar stuff, you know?
You've got to have the bops.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
I did find something interesting. So the band Bodega Bay was what it was. And then in the early days of Bodega, I read somewhere that you'd said for Can't Knock the Hustle that there was an early show where you played it like 15 times in a row. Similar in a sense to, you know, that story that Devo played Jocko Homo for 30 minutes straight, and people were just getting increasingly agitated and wanting to scrap with them on stage. So
they played as one 30-minute jam, or they played 30 times?
So, you know, the part where they're like, are we not men, we are Devo? Apparently that just went on for 30 minutes long, and people were...
That's amazing.
Yeah. Obviously, yours was the, 15 times in a row.
Yeah, ours was sort of like, we would say, okay, here's a new one. Be like, okay, this one's a cover. A bunch of people left the room, of course. But of the 10 or so people that have stayed, somebody came up to me last year and told me, look, that was one of the best shows I've ever seen. I hated it until I loved it. I mean, Bodega Bay was more like that. We were much more of like a performance art group, whereas Bodega has certainly kept a lot of that energy, but we're also trying to make beautiful music at the same time. Bodega Bay, we had this like secret underbelly of pop songs, but we presented ourselves as more like an agitprop group or something. But.
Sure.
Yeah.
I read that you described yourself as like a bit of an art troupe.
Yeah.
More than a pop band.
So many people in the band had never played music before. And we had a lot of people on stage, like more than we do now. Sometimes we'd have 7, 8 people. At least 6 always. And there was a guy, for example, this guy named Joe, who we called him the lead singer in air quotes. He wasn't really the lead singer. He was more like a hype guy. He was like Flavor Flav kind of. But he performed like a lead singer. So he would do these like Bowie-esque glam dance moves. He would be like Roger Daltrey from The Who. But he would basically just be singing the backup vocals. He had 2 songs of the original 33 that were totally the ones that he had written. Like...
For the listener, the fucking lights keep going. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, so he was like, I think like understanding Joe would be going a long way to understanding how Bodega Bay functioned, because Joe's kind of like a prankster, trickster kind of guy. He's also a filmmaker. We were all involved in other art forms. Like I'm a filmmaker as well. Nikki works in film, but at the time she was taking a lot of pictures, portraits. Our lead guitar player was a writer, and he quit too because he got a good job teaching English, but also really his heart is really in fiction and letters, not in punk rock. And our drummer Aiko is heavily involved in producing films. our bass player Tom was one of the only people that was really a music person, and they worked for a record label and played a lot of music. But I had been in a lot of bands where it was a lot of, for lack of a better word, band people, you know, who mostly listen to music, and their goal is to be in a really bitchin' band, which is a good goal, but it wasn't really our goal. We were more like a philosophical treatise, a living philosophical treatise, masquerading as a pop group. Yeah. I mean, Bodega's kind of like that as well, to a certain extent. But.
Well, I was going to ask, when it comes to members, so we've seen quite a few incarnations of the band from that Soup Kitchen show, and there's been a few lineup changes, but they're always like really, everyone's got such character to them, especially when they're playing. Whereas some bands, they might just get a new guy or a new woman in the band, and they're just filling in on guitar for now or what have you. Is there much of a process when it comes to, scouting people out, or is it kind of just picking like-minded?
Yeah, I'm like a casting director. Yeah. I see my role as basically, I see it like a filmmaking analogy. I basically write the script, which is basically the ideology of the band or the songs, and Nikki would be included in this as well. She writes her songs. And then Dan, for instance, is more like a cinematographer. He is the lead guitar player, so he kind of paints over songs and creates the emotional palette. It's like the lighting or the color in a movie. And he basically improvises, but then we choose his parts, and then we choose which parts we like the best. And of course, he's involved in that process, and then it comes together. And yeah, we don't, when we were looking for people to collaborate with, of course, the best bands have people that bring in energy that is uniquely their own. That's exactly like what a good actor brings to a film. They're a new vector in the sort of sacred geometry, and they can knock what the director wants off its axis, which can be frustrating, of course, but creates this new living organism that's the combination of all the different vectors, and that's why a band is infinitely more interesting than a solo project. They're complicated, and often, of course, there are disagreements and stuff like that. Bodega has been really lucky. All the members we've had are really great, and most of the reasons why a lot of them don't play with us anymore is because they just have their own thing going on. Like our very first drummer, Montana, she got really into sculpture, and that was where her heart was at. And Madison, our first lead guitar player, he has a rock band called The Wants that he's really into. Heather, our bass player, has a new band called Flossing. It's basically everyone's just like, it's great playing with you, but I got to do my own thing. And I totally get it. If I was in another person's band, I'd say, hey, I got to do my own thing eventually.
Yeah. I did think like that lineup as well with Heather on the bass and like the previous guitarist, he had such previous guitarist, he had such like a strong, almost German krautrock look to him.
He's got a striking look for sure.
Very robotic. But with that band Bodega Bay to Bodega re-release or reworking rather this new record, has there been a lot of change when it comes to the themes and the lyrical content, or do you think that you were discovering that a lot of it was still ringing true?
I'd say a lot of it's ringing true. I edited a little bit because when I had first written Bodega Bay, there's some horny lyrics that I thought I was kind of doing a Lou Reed thing in the way a super young person would, where like, for example, in Cultural Consumer Part 3, I said, I see the dome of the Barclay, I'm getting dome on the highway, which I still have in the original one just because that's that line is still valid to me. But after that, I said, suck me like real love. In the lyric, the cultural consumer is driving in a car, and he's imagining a lover filleting him in the shotgun seat, but they're not actually there. I thought this really isn't being communicated well with that lyric. And there's something kind of like juvenile about it. I'm trying to just get a shock also. So I changed certain lines like that, which I thought sort of diluted the actual message of the songs. I've had people from back in the day tell me, why'd you change those lines? Those are cool lines. So, what are you, a coward? But you know, that's part of the art making process. I'm sort of like George Lucas redoing Star Wars, and you know, I'm like, you know, I really wish there was a riff right here in this section, and that new little guitar break is me, you know, adding CGI robots in the background of a scene.
You should have just stuck that in the press release. I think that would have gone over a lot better.
Yeah, probably.
Great description.
Yeah.
So one of the touchstones for the record was Our Band Could Be Alive.
Yeah.
You know, it's the holy Bible for some musicians and music fans and journalists, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And it was about...
Are you into Our Band book?
I've been listening to the audiobook of late, because I've never read it, but I listened to Get in the Van, the Henry Rollins book, which is a fantastic audiobook because he just sounds so pissed off. And then I've been listening to the audiobook of Our Band Could Be Alive, and it's just so engrossing and so engaging. And that's, as you know, like a 35-year-old music fan. So I assume when you first read it, I assume the audiobook wasn't around, but I assume that it was such like a game changer for you.
It really was. Yeah, I read it just at the right time in my life. I think I was 21. And it was one of the big things that motivated me to take being in a band more seriously. I was really into existentialism at the same time, and I saw a parallel. It's like, you can create your own reality. If you want punk rock to be your life, all you have to do is decide that and then do it, and you can rewrite the rules. You don't have to play by anyone else's rules. And several of the bands in the book in particular have had such a lasting impression on me. The reason I read the book in the first place was Sonic Youth, because they were my heroes at that time. But then learning about the Minutemen and learning about Minor Threat and Fugazi and Husker Du, it just... You know, actually last night we saw Dinosaur Jr. play. They played at the Bearded Theory Festival they were at. I got to talk to their front of house guy for a while. I was sort of quizzing him about, you know, does Jay really have all 6 of those half stacks on, or some just for show? And he's like, no, they're all on.
We went and saw them at the Ritz a while back. And it was like, where do you want to stand? And it was like, I kind of want to stand near Jay, but I also want to see Jay. And you want to be like near the. So
I hope you brought your earplugs.
Oh yeah, you have to these days, don't you?
Yeah.
But I assume that was amazing being able to see them as well. Because did you ever see them back in the day?
Yeah, I've seen them a number of times. I actually saw them twice last December. They did. They were doing a run at Music Hall, which is in Brooklyn, and. Part of the appeal of going to multiple nights is they were bringing out different guests for the encore. They brought out one of the original guys from Deep Wound, their hardcore band before Dino. Yeah. That was great. So I love early hardcore. And the second night they brought out Captain Kirk from The Roots, and they were jamming on Neil Young and Jimi Hendrix. It was glorious dueling guitar solos. It was wonderful.
They brought out Richard Ayoade in, I don't even know where it was in the UK, but they brought him on and did I think he did rhythm on something, and it was like, God, that's fucking cool. That is cool. But also a strange.
Yeah, I was really hoping I would get one of the Kevin Shields or maybe the Lee Ronaldo, Cortez the Killer. Yeah, there's a lot of great ones that I saw. But
So you mentioned Sonic Youth. Mm-hmm. The First and More book, I read that you were, both of you and Nikki were really digging that as well. Yeah. Are there any...
You mean the Sonic Life one?
Yeah. The newer one.
Yeah, such a good read, yeah.
So are there any similar books of that ilk, past Our Band Could Be Your Life, that you were both particularly hot on in terms of,
Yeah, well, one of the key ones for us was Rip It Up and Start Again, which is... I see it as kind of like the British version of the Our Band Could Be Your Life one. I'd known about most of those bands, but it's written in such a neat way. My favorite music book of all time is Revolution in the Head, which is a Beatles book, but it's so much more than a Beatles book. Have you read that one?
No, I don't think so.
The premise is that there's basically like a chapter or a little entry for every song chronologically. And so he goes through and he talks about all the songs. And he's a classical guy, so he gets into a little music theory, which I always enjoy. But maybe more importantly, he tries to do this almost sociological dissection of what the Beatles music meant, both politically and aesthetically. And it sort of it maps out this incredible narrative that has forever changed how I thought about songwriting. And I love the book. I've read it cover to cover like 8 times. Not only because you get the thrill of seeing how the Beatles evolved and how rock and roll as an art form evolved, because almost every entry he has to talk about what else is happening at the time, all the other big singles that are out that week or whatever. But also he paints a wonderful picture of 2 separate modes of songwriting, where he talks about how Paul McCartney's songwriting is abstract and there's almost like a virtuosic showmanship to it, where sometimes it's personal, but it rarely is. And he's more like a great storyteller. And also his melodic sensibilities, his intervals when he's singing there's like lots of big jumps, whereas John Lennon's are more horizontal. He'll just jump, if you're looking at a piano, he's only going to the next key. And he'll go all over, but it's often sidestepping. Of course, there are Paul examples where he does that, and John examples where he does giant vertical leaps. But for the most part, that is their mannerisms. And then, of course, John's the opposite in that he's not theatrical, and he's often bearing his soul and confessing. And he's less of a craftsperson and more of just a raw, expressive person. But what's interesting is how he pits these as sort of this is the dialectic of pop songwriting. And then there are many examples where Paul is in the confessional avant-garde mode. In our song Cultural Consumer 3, I say, I got news for you all. Instead of the walrus was Paul, it's the cultural consumer was Paul. Because, he's really gone out of his way to say, hey, actually, I'm the one who introduced Stockhausen to the lads. I'm the one who brought in the tape loops. I'm the one who was interested in feedback before John was. And in many ways, John was, in an almost contradictory way, also really interested in showbiz and lush balladry and stuff like that. Well, of course they would influence each other by hanging out and writing music together. And no one person is ever in one mode. The best artists always are full of contradictions. But anyways, if anyone listening hasn't read Revolution in the Head, it's a stunning book, whether you like the Beatles or not. And I don't know why you wouldn't like the Beatles, but...
Did you watch the new flick? Well, I say the new flick, kind of similar to yourself.
Oh, they Get Back?
And the Let It Be as well.
Yeah.
So I spoke to someone recently, and they said, as a musician, they couldn't think of anything worse than watching like 9 hours of footage of, like rehearsing and sorting out the record and stuff. But I take it that you were a fan of the...
I love it. Actually, my favorite thing to read about is process. I love hearing how other people make records. Even if I don't like the record they made, I want to hear about how they made it.
Yeah.
It's as just a music fan and or just a fan of art in general, of course, I want to get closer to the magic. To me, it's the most exciting part of my day is when that magic will accidentally happen or when I will it to happen by even just sitting down to write a line of poetry or something, and all of a sudden there's something there on your page that wasn't there before. That to me is going to be the most exciting 5 minutes of the day. So I want to see how other people do it. And to me, one of the greatest moments I've ever seen in cinema history is when Paul sits down and they let the camera roll.
Oh, incredible. Yeah.
And he pulls Get Back out of just droning on an A power chord on his bass. And it's do-do-do-do-do-do-do. And you're like, there it is. It's amazing. It's so beautiful.
And the fact that the 2 very scouse blokes in front of him are just sat there like, fucking hell, this is taking forever to germinate. And then obviously...
Yeah. Well, what's amazing about them is they worked so fast in the beginning. And then once... They literally were an industry at that time. They had the Apple Corporation and obviously hundreds of people following them around. It must have been incredibly difficult to be spontaneous anymore. What's interesting about that record is it's often talked about, Let It Be, as a failure, and in some ways, like the first slog for the Beatles or an absolute misstep for the Beatles or something like that. But if you think about it, they willed 12 really bitchin' songs, 2 or 3 of them, which are total standards now, in basically 3 weeks. That would be fine enough to sustain a band's career for 5 years now,
If that.
Yeah.
I love that record. Let It Be. So good as well. That kind of takes us into the video that you guys produced for Cultural Consumer, the discussion of the background behind the song, and this Pokemon gotta catch 'em all mentality about once you've read this, you need to read that, and you need to follow who they were influenced by, and then with music, listen to this, and then touchstones, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah.
And then ultimately you become someone who's possibly one-upping, and then ultimately all you are is someone buying music or literature or what have you. So do you find, as well as coming up with this character of the cultural consumer, that there's quite a lot of personal reflection in these aspects as well?
Absolutely, yeah. I see it as I'm like maybe a cultural consumer in rehab.
Sure.
And I'm making fun of myself. To me, there's almost a metaphysical thing happening. There's many problems with being a cultural consumer. Some of them are economical, some of them are political. This is the metaphysical one, or an aesthetic one, really. So I think the danger is you have this art object in front of you, and instead of actually experiencing it for what it is, or having, let's say, an authentic experience of the world, it's filtered through this apparatus. So we've all had this experience where you're listening to a song and you're not really listening to it. You're listening through the lens of other things that you've read about it. I have this deep suspicion that a lot of the music that I actually like, I only like because I think I'm supposed to like it. Of course I like it now. But did I fall in love with Sonic Youth because I genuinely loved their songs and the sounds of those tunings and the way they play together? Or do I like it because graphically on a piece of paper, Sonic Youth looks like a really cool band name? Or do I like it because I've read that they're an important New York City band, and if I'm a punk kid in New York, this is something I should like? How do you know? Of course, I think I have my own authentic reaction to their music, but there's no way to tell now. There's so many vectors of influences going on in my mind that it's too late for me to ever really know. Same way that when you go look at a painting in a museum, you may think you're having a genuine reaction to it, but you're looking at, okay, this is a famous artist. Okay, you read the little plaque. It tells you why it's important. I don't know. There's all kind of things happening like that. And I feel like when the classics are read, for example, when we read Shakespeare, we read it as if, in the way like James Joyce would have read it, or it seems like he would have read it, where it's just references upon references upon reference. It's almost like the hyperlink way of reading, which is the way, not to say that's any less authentic, that's the way mine works as well. You catch little references that are, a new group has a song, in it there's a reference to a Bob Dylan song, I'll catch that. But his is a reference to something older, which is a reference to the Old Testament. And you just keep going back and back and back. But you fear sometimes that you're forgetting that Shakespeare was a real person. What he's writing about are real emotions and the locality of the culture in which he was writing, and the idioms and norms and morality of the time that he was writing. And this is especially relevant in old films. You forget that the people on the screen are actually real people. Or when you hear an old record, these are actual musicians playing and singing. They're not just signifiers and text. There's people there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And it's interesting as well. I heard someone on a podcast recently say about with film, and I'm sure you will, have thought about this yourself, that nobody goes in to make a film and make a bad film. Mm-hmm. Everyone's working on that film because they've got the idea that it's going to be, and then studio trick. I
don't know. I've been on a lot of film sets where people knew, okay, this is a stupid B movie, and we're just having fun.
Sure. Yeah.
But I bet the director didn't think that.
Yeah.
This is the crew that thought that.
But then maybe like with Troma and those sorts of studios, that was the vision though, wasn't it? It's we're gonna have Toxie do this, but it's supposed to be shit.
Yeah.
But that's the point,
I just mean there's often this energy on film sets, at least in the low budget New York world, where the director and let's say the key three principals, they think they're really doing something serious, but then there becomes almost this cliquey aspect where the I guess what you call them, the technicians, the sound people, and some of the PAs and stuff, they're all hanging out, smoking cigarettes in the hallway, and basically they think they know better. wow, the scene they just did, does anybody in there realize how stupid it actually is? I don't know if that's just because they wish they were the ones directing that particular scene, but I mean, that's one true thing about cinema, is that everyone is a critic. You know, my grandma could watch a movie and thinks that she could tell you how the story would go better. Not many people would look at other art forms, like hear a symphony and say, well, really, in the B section there, you know, there was a harmonic misstep, a lot of missed opportunity for tension and release here. But why is it that we all think we understand movies?
Yeah. It's kind of the same as well with self-releasing music compared to self-publishing, because people are like, yeah, right on, they released their record, and then someone self-publishes, and it's like, it's a bit full of yourself, you know. It's a strange, I don't know, maybe with cinema as well, I don't know. But yeah, so in terms of themes and content and such, I read something that Nikki said about still trying to figure out how to get this across to an audience, because as we discussed before, I think some people will dig deep on things, whereas other people just want to hear bops and such. Mm-hmm. How difficult is it, you know, thinking about that consciously, that you want to get this idea across, but then you've got to think of an audience?
Yeah, well, I'm always conflicted, because I listen to music myself in many different modes, as I suspect a lot of people do. Like if I'm exercising and I'm going for a run, I want the quick hit of sugar rush hooks. So I'm going to play a quick playlist, and maybe even after the first or second chorus, I'm going to the next song, because I need that sugar rush. And I wouldn't disparage somebody who listened, and I'd be honored if they wanted to use 1 minute of a Bodega track in that way. And in many ways, our music is very crammed with what I would call hooks. Because I was very conscious of that when we first started. Like with Endless Scroll, the songs are really short, and there are never any kind of interstitial moments in the music. It's just, and the lyrics hardly ever repeat. It's like, okay, once we've said this idea, we don't need to repeat it. Let's go to the next track. That's why a lot of the songs are like 90 seconds long. But then there's also the cerebral way of listening to music, where you're maybe more relaxed and you're really listening, and you're way more patient, and perhaps the hooks are, you know, in many ways the cheap stuff that you're not really looking for. You're looking, and then there's maybe a third way, which is almost has nothing to do with the music at all, or less to do with the music, which is the hyper abstract way, where you're reading along to the lyrics, and you're kind of almost doing like a linguistic reading of what the thing is actually saying in a word way and in a conceptual way. You know, there's many different ways to enjoy music, and the goal would be to make something that can be enjoyed on all fronts. Yeah, it's a tension, because we want to be the kind of band that really caters towards a really specific listener. I always say what I want Bodega to do is what I would want my favorite band to do. Yeah. You can't ever guess what's going on in someone else's head, but you can guess what's going on in your head. So I cater our set list, and I make our records thinking of what a person like me would like. But it's kind of like what we were talking about set lists earlier. You also want to play, you know, the songs that you've put out as singles, and songs that are super high energy and that you can tell from night to night go down a little better than other ones. I don't really, you know, there's a very Gen X mentality of don't play your hit. There's something, it's too bourgeois to play like the song people like. I totally think that's stupid and moronic. I definitely don't want to be that kind of band. Mm. But at the same time, I want to treat the live show like an art medium in and of itself. In order to do that, there has to be enough spontaneity in there for the band to be able to create something in the moment that is only happening this one night. If you don't do that and you're just going up and you're playing the songs in the same order every night, that's deadly dull. And I feel like you're almost doing the audience a disservice, because you're doing yourself a disservice. Mm.
It feels like very much something that you would steer clear of. But do you find it ever difficult being in that headspace, you know, where you say, right, we're in Cardiff tonight or we're in Leeds tomorrow, and just trying to get out of that mindset of it would be great if we could just, you know, autopilot it? I take it, you know, that doesn't ever seem like a thing that would.
Not really. I mean, I take our set list pretty seriously. I personally update the set list, you know, the website Setlist FM. it's like a
yeah.
archive of set lists. I even if other people post our set list, I go through and edit it just to make sure it's as good as possible. And what I do, what I was working on this morning, is I looked at every time we've played in Manchester up till now, and I'm thinking, okay, well, what haven't we done? What, and so if I'm the kind of person that's seen all the shows in Manchester, at least you'll get a couple songs that you've never seen before. But also, let's do something different, but not too different. It's a permutation,
Yeah.
And also different from last night, because there are a couple of people that will see Bodega, maybe like 8 or 9 times on this tour. So you have to think of them, and let's give them a reward for going to multiple shows. And I personally want to treat. There's certain deep cuts that maybe the audience doesn't want to hear, but I'll pour a lot into the show if I get to play that song. So there's this constant push and pull between what the performer wants, what you assume a general public wants, what you assume the heads want, what you assume the promoter wants.
True.
Yeah.
That thing about updating Setlist FM yourself as well is so, as a live reviewer, that's heaven to hear. So, speaking of new material, you touched on it before. I've read somewhere that you've already written like 50 plus songs and ideas that you've got. And because you've moved away from the trilogy in a sense, is it kind of similar to what Joe Casey from Proto Martyr said? Is it kind of refreshing to be able to go, this is something new? This is new Bodega song. Yeah.
Well, so we have 2 big batches of material we've been working on recently. One is actually because I reread Our Band Could Be Your Life maybe about 9 months ago, because I realized, okay, I'm probably going to talk about it a lot. I should revisit it. And it was fun and I re-listened to all the discographies of all the bands. And one of the obvious things about the book, but that maybe I didn't think was as important as before, but so all the great bands in that book started out as hardcore bands.
Yeah.
Even the Replacements had a hardcore phase. And you could argue that maybe the first full-length Sonic Youth record, Confusion and Sex, is actually kind of has some hardcore elements in it. It's not like trad hardcore, but there's hardcore mentality and hardcore rhythms in there. And so I started really getting into hardcore again for the first time in a long time, and learning all the Minor Threat discography and stuff, which you can do in an afternoon, but it's so good. It's as good as the Beatles. To me, like the first Minor Threat 7-inch, those 8 songs, is maybe the most perfect 7-inch that ever was. I mean, it's at least right there with Strawberry Fields, Forever, and Penny Lane, It's just, it's everything I like about punk rock, and everything I like about the electric guitar, really. So I decided I wanted to make a hardcore record. So we've been doing our version of hardcore, which it's kind of similar to the 1982 version of hardcore, but we're bringing in some metal. So there's like some early thrash influences, and we're also bringing in what's happening in modern hardcore. So we have this alter ego band called No Dega, and we have a bunch of No Dega stuff. And then, separate from that, we're working on that's going to come out in between the 3rd and 4th record. We've already recorded most of it. But the 4th record we have a huge batch of songs for, and we want that to be a total break. The No Dega stuff is conceptually related to Our Brain Could Be Your Life, and it'll feel almost like an add-on to that, just an aggressive version because the record we just put out is quite poppy and jangly, and it's that side of underground rock, whereas the No Dega stuff will be pretty tough. But the 4th record, I kind of want to do something completely different, and it won't have much relationship at all to all the Bodega stuff we've done. Of course, it's us, but I hesitate to say too much about what it is, but it hopefully should surprise people and be its own unique thing. That I don't want it to have any relationship to post-punk or the kind of way we've been writing about social critique. I think it won't. Yeah, I don't know. It's more of what I'm calling it. it's sort of like an autobiographical record. A lot of the songs I've written so far, and I know that Nikki has as well, has been, okay, we've been in social critique mode for so long. I just want to write about something I just experienced. And often on the Bodega records, I would consciously split up the songwriting, where there would be like, okay, these are social critique songs, and then if I'm writing a really personal song, it'll probably be a ballad. Like the good examples would be After Jane from Broken Equipment, or Charlie from Endless Scroll. And I've sort of had this epiphany recently, which is quite obvious, but it was an epiphany to me, is you could write songs dealing with as personal subject matter and also make them fast, aggressive songs. They don't have to be separate. So I've been trying to break down that category of I guess, like songwriting modes. I already probably said too much of what I should say, because that record's not done yet. But that's been my mentality of making it. But
sure,
I mean, that one won't be out for, I bet, at least a year, possibly 2 years. You know,
which is the crazy thing about writing. I take it,
yeah,
that everything is just so far away.
Yeah, it's one of the frustrating things to me. Is you think with the way technology is now, that we could write a song, we could record it, and it should be able to just be up on streaming stuff in a month. But the way the music industry is set up, you know, we do this kind of thing where you work on something for a year and a half, you put it out, you tour and promote it for a year and a half, and then you do it again. And I guess, you know, it's just capitalism reasons. Let's do a proper supply and demand. You don't want to overburden the listener or whatever.
Yeah.
And also, you know, you have to think about the actual production cost, blah, blah, blah. There are certain bands that totally bypass that model, like King Gizzard, for example. They can put out 6 records in 1 year. Maybe only their most diehard fans will listen to all of them, but it almost doesn't matter. I'm jealous of them in that way. I wish I was as savvy as they were in that regard. Maybe in the future I'll figure it out. I mean, they're really living in the Ian MacKaye mindset, where you do your own record label.
It's all, is it Flightless?
Yeah,
it's all in house, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And that thing they did where they gave people the tools to put their own records out as bootlegs. Did you see that?
Yeah,
incredible.
It is so good. It's so smart, and yeah, I really admire how they run their band. I mean, I like a lot of their music as well, but they've turned what most indie filmmakers have realized, and the best bands realize, is your mode of production is your aesthetic. And so there's something really interesting about that. Yeah.
On that hardcore hype, did you enjoy, or do you like the OCs first and foremost? But did you like
their hardcore record? Yeah, it was awesome. I loved it.
Such a cool idea to just dip into the past and
yeah. No, I mean, I think audiences and bands are less interested in doing one thing now, and that's definitely true of me as a listener. Like today, I want to listen to death metal, but tomorrow I want to listen to folk music, or I want to listen to techno music. And I think the best bands, I mean, that's essentially what the Beatles did. They played in all genres, and you can only be yourself in all these different genres. Unfortunately, I think the way a lot of streaming works is it rewards people for really playing in one lane. If I'm listening to New Order, and the algorithm's going to go to other contemporaries in the 80s. It'll go to, say, Depeche Mode and The Cure and blah, blah, blah. But then pretty soon it's going to need to go to a new band. And if you're a band that just makes carbon copies of 80s synth, indie, post-punk, whatever you want to call it, you're going to get rewarded and you're going to get those big algorithm boosts. But essentially, you're doing what an AI could do, which is making endless permutations of a classic mold. That's the problem with genre, really, is in any art form, literature or painting, is if you stick too close to the genre, where's the actual voice coming from? There's nothing wrong with genre exercise, and in fact, a lot of my favorite books could just be, you could just call it, it's a genre exercise, and same with songwriting as well. But the best songwriters can't help but be themselves when they're, if you gave if you gave John Lennon and you know, you'd have to fast forward to say 1986, and you said, write me a thrash metal song. His version of a thrash metal song would be so interesting. It's too bad we didn't get to hear that. Right?
God. Can you imagine?
I mean, we wouldn't have heard that, I don't think,
No.
because he was born way too late.
Yeah.
You have to be. I think your tastes stop evolving after a certain point for most people.
I mean, Ringo Starr's famously not put out a hardcore record, so that's probably true.
Yeah. Well, I mean, have you seen John's last interview? They said, what are you listening to? And he said, there's a new band that's my favorite group, B-52s.
Wow.
So we might have gotten a post-punk Lennon record. And a lot of Ono Plastic Band has very post-punky stuff about it. Like the record, you know, like when Yoko does Why and Why Not, it sounds very similar to Can or something. So it's possible he could have gone in that direction.
I like the way that history wrote her in a certain way.
Yeah.
And then you listen to those Plastic Ono Band records and it's like, she was completely the other way to what people say, you know, the breaking up the Beatles and stuff. Some of her songs on those John Lennon records are so good.
Unbelievable, yeah.
Yeah. Lastly, I just wanted to get a live thought on what you thought when Patti Smith said what she said about young New York artists, that they want to pack up their bags and just move to Detroit because of, you know, the way things are, etc., which appears referenced on City Is Taken on the new record.
Yeah.
So when that came across, what was your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, there's this aspect of the record. That's why it's called Our Brand Could Be Your Life. It's sort of doing what Thurston recommended, kill your idols. And realizing that the longer these bands stayed together, they just became brands. The original spark was diluted. And it's not necessarily a critique of any bands. I'm very fortunate and lucky enough to have seen Dinosaur Jr. 4 times this year now, right? I'm not like knocking them for staying together. But we're always looking at what can be updated from the rock and pop apparatus, right? That's one of the things to critical art, is it's not merely a destructive thing. It's, well, what can be improved upon. Anyways, all I'm saying is Nikki in particular, are big Patti Smith fans. I know Dan loves Patti Smith, but one of the things that's frustrating about Patti Smith is she's so much a cultural consumer herself, and so much a champion of the past, and in many ways is a nostalgia artist. In a good way, oftentimes, in an inspiring way, times. I mean, her books are basically positive examples of nostalgia, and nostalgia is not all bad. We wouldn't have Proust if there wasn't nostalgia, right? But she has a cottage industry of basically just selling you how authentic 70s New York was, right? And when you go to the Strand bookstore, there's a whole little table of all the, you know, her books plus all the coffee table books of CBGBs and Chelsea Hotel and all that adjacent stuff. It's a little tourist industry, right? Yeah. So if you were to pop into the Strand, you could buy those books. In the same way that when you go to Paris, you want to buy a movable feast, and there's always going to be a little table of that at Shakespeare & Co. in Paris, right? And I understand that to a certain extent. But when Patti Smith has the gall to say, New York is dead, move to Detroit, she meant it well, I think. Yeah. She was just saying, look, you've been priced out by the capitalists, you should move. I kind of get that. But it's also disrespectful to all the people living in New York, especially the people not living in Manhattan, all of us who are living in as far away from Manhattan as we can while still being in New York, still trying to make a scene happen, and sort of actually making a scene happen, but being told, hey, you're never going to be as authentic as the 70s New Yorkers were. There's a part of me that's like, well, part of the reason why Manhattan is as gentrified as it is because you won't quit selling this idea of it, right? Like I saw Patti Smith open for Neil Young many, many years ago. It was probably like 2011 or something at Madison Square Garden. And it was like some kind of anniversary of a Jimi Hendrix thing. So she had a giant Jimi Hendrix banner behind her. And her band did some like Are You Experience kind of stuff, which is cool. I like Jimi Hendrix too. And in many ways, her job, probably the way she sees it, is kind of what I was saying earlier. Let's actually re-listen to Jimi Hendrix and realize what a visionary and poet he was. let's get past the Hard Rock Cafe cliches of what we think Jimi Hendrix is, and let's experience Jimi Hendrix again from a new angle and celebrate it, which I totally respect and admire in many ways. But the setting with everybody drinking $25 Bud Lights and like also, okay, you can buy this new remaster of Horses at the concession stand for $50 or whatever. The whole thing just reeked of, this is why rock and roll now feels like jazz. It's because we can't move on. Like, let's quit talking about the old stuff and let's make some new room.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I need my phone charger. You have to find it.
Okay.
That's perfect.
I'm doing merch. I'm at like 2%. I need it.
Okay. I'll find it.
He's had 3 hours to do this. 3 hours. Find it. Okay.
Sorry.
Perfect. Thank you, Mickey.
Yeah.